Welcome to the Atlas Project broadcast. The Atlas Project is a weekly chapter-by-chapter online discussion group about Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, in celebration of the 60th anniversary of the publication of the novel in 1957. Every week on Wednesday, we will post discussion questions about the latest chapter for readers to discuss in real life or on our Facebook group. After reviewing the resulting discussion, we'll present a live broadcast every Tuesday night in which we'll discuss the most interesting aspects of the week's reading in light of your contributions. Participants should remember the three basic ground rules: be civil, be relevant, and most importantly, don't post spoilers about sections of the novel we've not yet read. Experienced readers who wish to discuss spoilers should join the Atlas Project Spoilers group on Facebook. Links to our groups and other relevant group material are available at atlasproject.live. And now, enjoy the broadcast. My name is Ben Baer. I'm a fellow at the Ayn Rand Institute, and this is our inaugural broadcast of the Atlas Project. And we've done a bunch of test broadcasts up until this point, but none before the audience that we have tonight, and none with live people in our classroom. This is a weekly chapter-by-chapter reading group, and the way it works is we will post discussion questions, typically Wednesday nights, about the upcoming reading, and the discussion's then supposed to happen online for a while. Once that happens for a while, we'll monitor it, we'll take a look and see what people are saying about the chapters that they're reading, and then we'll review it, take that into account, and discuss it in our live Facebook broadcast as the event transpires. Tonight is special. We're having it on a Saturday night because those of you who've read Chapter 1 know September 2nd plays a special role in the book, and but subsequent evenings, we're going to be doing this Tuesday nights, not this coming Tuesday. We're going to take a week and a half off after the first broadcast. So our next broadcast will be on September 12th. Everything that you need to know to participate in the project is going to be available at atlasproject.live. And there you can see things like our course plan. Please review the rules of discussion. There's three big rules: be civil, be relevant, and don't give spoilers, especially if you've read the book before. We're going to try to prioritize first-time readers in all of our discussions, and that includes tonight, whether we're dealing with live students or we're dealing with people online. So please, if you are online and you are contributing to the comment thread, please try to indicate that you are a first-time reader. We will look to your questions first. And otherwise, I think that's everything I have to open things up. I'm going to turn this now over to Greg Salmieri, who's in New York. And Greg is going to give us some opening advice.
So we've had the group going on Facebook for about a week now. And just looking over the discussion questions there and the discussion that's happening there, which is really exciting. There's been a lot of good discussion, but a few thoughts occurred to me as things to say to people participating in that discussion and who are going to be participating, I hope, in the chat with us live tonight. So we're reading this novel. We're reading it over the course of a pretty long time, over the course of 8 months. And we're pretty early in the novel now. I've got this little timeline of it that I'm going to have up on the Facebook group so we could always see where we are. And we're just in the first of 30 chapters. And there's a real danger in getting ahead of yourself when reading anything, particularly if you've read it before, or if you've kind of got a sense of what it's going to be about from your sense of the culture or whatever. There's a danger of reading in what you assume from an earlier reading or what you've picked up from the culture. And part of what we want to try to do here is really be looking at the novel fresh, thinking about what's in the text that supports what I'm saying, what is it that's giving me this impression, if I'm having a negative reaction, a positive reaction, it seems like or unlike something. Well, what, actually on the pages that we've read so far in this first chapter are doing that. In particular, one way that this comes up when we are thinking about it is I think we want to favor more concrete and observational statements rather than abstract and theoretical or explanatory statements about what's going on. In life and in literature, you go from observing concrete things to drawing wider and wider generalizations about them and coming to understand more deeply and more deeply over time why they're happening. That's how the mind works. I think that's also how the mind works when you're reading a piece of literature. You're introduced to some character, you've just met him, you observe some things about him and maybe other characters in that world, and over time you're in a position to form more general opinions about these people, how they typically act, what's going on in the world, and to understand why. And so we want to know that we're all the way here on the left side of this at the very beginning of the novel. My camera's a mirror image of me, so I'm pointing the wrong way on the screen. Here we go, at the very beginning of the novel, and as we get more towards the right, we're going to be in a position to go wider and deeper. But now, if you have a theory like, the essence of human nature is X, Y, Z, and this is true of people everywhere, and that's why this guy said he didn't like his sister, that's probably too much too soon. We'll get to some deep truths about humanity, but we want to just start with, it's kind of weird, what's going on in this family, or whatever the issue might be. So I think we want to be less definitive at first and more questioning and observational. That's unusual. Why is that? How is this happening? Also, it's a mystery story, so we should expect it to start out by getting a lot of questions, and gradually they get answers. And so all the questions we're giving you guys on Facebook as discussion questions are meant to kind of prime observation, notice things, get you talking, not, you get extra credit if you guess the right answer at the end of the book. Okay, that said, let me talk a little bit about what we're going to do tonight. So a novel really has three main elements, a plot, a theme, characters, and a setting. And the plot is sort of the abstract message that's conveyed by the book. That's just the thing I've been saying we should wait a bit to get to. So we're not going to talk too much about the theme. Sorry, it's the theme. I might have said plot. The theme is the abstract message. So we're not going to talk too much about the theme, even though this first chapter is called The Theme, and we'll think about why that is, until a little bit later in the project. The questions that we posted online to prompt the online discussion mostly focused on getting a sense of the setting, what kind of world are we in, right? And getting a sense of the main characters. And we are going to talk a lot about that tonight, the setting and the characters. But what I want to start with is the plot. We're only at the very beginning of the novel. We're starting to see the situation develop that's going to generate the plot out of it. And I just want to start by talking a little bit, which we haven't done in the online group yet, about some of the issues that are giving rise to the plot situation in the novel. So, particularly for new readers who are here, but for anyone who wants to come in on this, what's happening in this first chapter? Does anyone? I'm just adjusting the video because I want to have Ben be visible. Here we go, and now audible. Ben, you should be in a little picture-in-picture now. What are the plot actions in this novel so far? We've met a bunch of people who are all connected with the same railroad, Taggart Transcontinental. And what's the situation of the railroad that's starting to get addressed? Yeah, in the back. Good. So they have different perspectives on what should happen with the railroad because the railroad isn't functioning correctly. And in particular, James, it seems like Eddie Willers and Daphne Taggart are more aligned on what to do, and James Taggart is different. But what is the problem that the railroad is having that they're having different perspectives on, the different views on how to deal with? What? Okay, so there was a railroad accident on this Rio Norte line that they have, and that's troubling. But it's not an isolated incident that there was, this Rio Norte line is in really bad shape. They're having wrecks every day. Eddie comes at the beginning to try to impress upon James, who's the president of the company, how big a problem their Rio Norte line is. Why is it such a big problem? They got one line that's not in good shape. Is it just, it's bad for a railroad to have any line that's not in good shape, or is there any reason why this is particularly a problem for them? Okay, that is, I think what we're talking about now is the particular train, the Taggart Comet, has never been late. And when we first meet Daphne, she's on the comet, and it looks like it's about to be late, and she's going to stop it. The comet's part of their transcontinental line that goes from San Francisco to New York. The Rio Norte line is a line that serves Colorado, Wyoming, that area of the country. What's the particular problem? So it seems like Taggart Trans-Continental's got bigger problems than their Rio Norte line, or if their problems aren't limited to that. Even their main special train from New York to San Francisco's never been late yet, but it seems like it's only a matter of time. But they've got problems. For some reason, this line is particularly important to Eddie and to Daphne. Why?
It's been about 15 years for me, but I'm thinking it was the mountain.
So it does go through the mountainous areas, but the line has a special importance to the railroad. So let's think back to, why is this railroad in trouble generally? Any thoughts?
No maintenance.
There's no maintenance on the railroad. Okay, so the railroads, and particularly this line, is really shot. But what does a railroad need to make money? I mean, what do railroads do? It carries people and goods, especially. Yeah, so there are oil fields in Colorado. And in general, we're getting an impression in this world that it's a world where a lot of the, just changing what we can see, it's a world where a lot of the industry isn't going well, right? It's an impoverished world. And we can see that from Eddie Willer's walk in the first scene. This is a prosperous street, Fifth Avenue, and only a quarter of the shops are closed. That's a prosperous street. There's a skyscraper with a big crack in it. There's something, this world's gone poor, right? There's some kind of economic failing in the world. And Eddie says at one point, most of the major shippers' traffic is down. Except there's one big exception to that. Where is there a lot of traffic? Colorado, which is served by this one branch that just sucks. So the one place in the country that there's a lot of business for a railroad to do, they are uncompetitive because their rail to that line is so bad. Now, why is Colorado so important? Why is it suddenly having a boom? The whole country, even the whole world, it seems like, is in some kind of malaise. But what's going on in Colorado that makes it an exception? Yeah, Mohammed. They're shipping oil, Mohammed says, and it's been discovered. What exactly has happened in the lights are changing here. What exactly has happened in Colorado? There's been there's an industrial boom. Somebody said Ellis Wyatt. So who's Ellis Wyatt? He owns the oil fields. Yeah, so in effect, Ellis Wyatt invented fracking or something like that, right? I mean, we had these oil fields, I mean, we're told what he does later. Well, that's not really a spoiler, but we're told more about his process, and it seems a bit like hydraulic fracturing. But the oil was running out. His father managed to eke an obscure living from this oil field he had. Everybody else, like everything else in the world, seems to be going south for whatever reason. You can't get a good typewriter anymore, damn it. When the old typewriters are done, that'll be the end of typewriting. The new ones are made of tin. And it's seeming like it's like that in various aspects of the world. And it's seeming like it was like that in oil, too. All of the old oil plants and oil wells or fields are running dry. And Colorado was running dry, too, when his father somehow scraped a living. And then all of a sudden, Ellis Wyatt has this great new discovery. There's booming oil in Colorado. That attracts a lot of other businesses around Colorado. Nobody expects Colorado to be like this new economic hub, but it is. And now here's Taggart Transcontinental unprepared because their railroad to that part of the country is just not any good. And now it's desperately needed there. So what do Daphne and Eddie want to do about that? Yeah, they want to rebuild it, and they especially want to rebuild it with this new alloy named Reardon metal made by a guy named Reardon, who we'll learn more about in due course. And what's Jim's perspective on this? Yeah, except it's interesting. You're saying that Jim doesn't want to try someone new out, like Daphne does with Reardon Metal. Now, it is true that Reardon Metal is a new product, and Jim is afraid to try the new product out. But recall, it says that Reardon also makes steel, and Reardon Steel is the company that they've been dealing with for their steel for a decade. But for some reason, Jim's really eager to deal with this Oren Boyle instead, who never gives you the steel. And he says, well, we want to give the little guy a shot and so forth. All right, so he wants to try to give Oren Boyle a chance. He talks about trying to give Mexico a chance. But what's his attitude towards the Rio Norte line? What does Eddie think his attitude towards the Rio Norte line is? Any thoughts?
He thinks it's going to be disruptive, but for the bad, not for the good.
Yeah, he doesn't think it's going to be good to get this new Reardon Metal. He thinks that's going to be disruptive for the bad. He also seems to think Ellis Wyatt is a force for the bad in some way. He's angry at him for some reason. That's a little unclear. And it seems to me that what Eddie's bothered about is Jim's just like weirdly unconcerned about the problem. It's like his focus is somewhere else, and we'll talk a bit about that later. So we have, I think, a sense now of what's going on in the situation, in the novel. We have a world that's failing economically. As part of that, this railroad, Taggart Transcontinental, is failing economically. There are a number of causes to that, but one of the causes is there's just not as much stuff to ship. There's the one place that's an exception to that, Colorado, where this guy, Wyatt, has done something, and as a result, there's been a whole cluster of industrialists giving rise in Colorado when Taggart Transcontinental can't take advantage of it. Daphne has this plan or Eddie's really concerned about this. Jim doesn't seem interested in it. Daphne has a plan to solve it, and her plan is she's going to rebuild this line so that it'll be the best line in the area out of this new metal, Reardon Metal, and then she'll make so much money serving Colorado that she'll be able to get the railroad back on the right track. Oh, I didn't realize that was a metaphor. She'll be able to right the railroad. Okay. So that's just where we are in the plot situation so far. We're going to cut now over to Ben, who's going to start us talking about the characters.
I don't have as big of an audience as Greg does, and so rather than interacting with them as much, though I encourage you to do so, I am going to try to focus more on the internet chat. So I'm going to see what the internet chat people have to say about this. And yeah, we are going to start by talking about Eddie. And one of the discussion questions that we put out about Eddie was, what do the first few pages of the novel tell us about his state of mind? And then there was a separate discussion question about the different emotional reactions of the characters, and one of them was Eddie. And so we did see a number of comments in the pre-existing discussion about Eddie's state of mind and about his emotional reactions. And so a good number of people noted that throughout the novel, throughout the chapter, but especially towards the beginning, Eddie is displaying a kind of causeless uneasiness. He feels kind of dread without reason when he's first confronted with the bum. Something about that question, who is John Galt, especially sparks that for him. And it also feels that way to him as he's walking through the city streets, looking at some of the things that Greg just talked about. At the same time, other commentators online noted that not everything about the first chapter, not everything in the situation makes Eddie feel uneasy. There is something that gives him an important sense of security. And of course, what is that? And I'm looking to you live folks and also to my internet chatters. So what is the one thing in the first chapter that that gives Eddie a sense of security?
I think he's referring to either the building itself or his job.
So it's kind of both. Yeah. So someone from my audience here says Taggart Transcontinental as embodied by the building in particular. And Aaron online notes the same thing. So does Corey. So does Brian. Excellent. So there's a kind of a mix here of different reactions. Something about the world generally puts Eddie in a state of disease, but the Taggart Building is reassuring to him. Now, there's a big question about what exactly is the relationship between those two things. And to focus that, I thought I would ask the following question to everybody here, but especially to the internet audience. What do Eddie's thoughts about the oak tree reveal to us? And in particular, what do they reveal to us about the cause of his dis-ease? If you could be, and this requires a little bit of speculation on your part, though I don't think it requires too much. So what's the significance? Here's a nutshell version of the question. What's the significance of the oak tree? And that's for anybody who wants to take a piece of that.
Okay, we have some
Especially
people here who
first-time
want to comment on that.
And don't forget, by the way, if you're online, to indicate if you're a first-time reader. What is the significance of the oak tree? So Alex points out the oak tree is hollow. I know Alex isn't a first-time reader, but that's a good piece of data to put on the table. Keith is definitely not a first-time reader. He says Eddie thinks it will stand there for a long time. Roger says the same thing. Richard points out, yes, it's rotting.
Ben, I've got a few people
so we've got
here
some
who want
good
to comment
data
on the oak tree.
about the oak tree that people are putting in the comments. But what's the significance of that? Christopher says there's some similarity here to Taggart Transcontinental. So, what's the significance?
I think that part of it is that he feels very secure about Taggart Transcontinental, the same way that he felt.
I think what I'm seeing people saying, both here in my classroom and also in the chat, is that there is a similarity between the oak tree and between Taggart. Somebody in the chat pointed out, there's a sense in which both of them are hollow inside, and this is something that Eddie is not explicitly identifying to himself. And there's of course a catchphrase that's going through his mind for a while. Your days are numbered, which serves as the connection in certain ways, but he's not able to remember it. And it's worth thinking about this, especially since he doesn't himself directly grasp this similarity. What might that have to say about why he feels uneasy about the world? What's the significance of his feeling about the state of Taggart Transcontinental for his feelings about the world? Especially considering some of the things that Greg talked about in the earlier segment about what function and what role Taggart is fulfilling or trying to fulfill at this point. Let me just see what's going on in the chat. Greg, one of the things that I'm discovering about this is that the chat is going by so quickly because so many people are writing comments that it's hard to keep up with it and to even read it. So one thing I'll suggest to people who are in the chat right now is I think it's better to write slightly longer posts. And if you're only going to write a short post, you might want to refrain from doing it because that contributes to the overall volume. And then that makes things go by faster and it's harder to react to them. But good. We're getting a lot of interesting thoughts on the significance of the oak tree. I had another question to talk about in connection with Eddie, but I don't know, Greg, if we want to talk about it, given time considerations. The one about why it seems the state of dis-ease and unease state seems causeless to Eddie and what he's doing mentally that's responsible for this. But I think it's probably good at this point to move on to talking about Jim and
I think
Agni.
Maybe one way to put it that connects us to that. I'm just switching the way the audio is here to stop some echoing that's happening on your end with you, Ben. One issue that I think is relevant here is why does Eddie think of the oak tree in the first place on this occasion? What prompts him to think of it? What's he doing right before? Al, did...
Well, the oak tree was once very strong. Continues to give the appearance
Right.
no longer has.
Yes, so the oak tree is something that was strong and that he took a lot of reassurance in and then discovered was hollow. But why does he think of it on this occasion in the first place? How does that relate to the issues in the world? What prompts him to think of it? Yeah.
He was actually walking on the Fifth Avenue and he was noticing that the stores were empty. So
Yeah.
probably would trigger that.
But what's interesting to me about that scene, so he's saying Eddie thought of it when he was walking on Fifth Avenue and noticing that a quarter of the stores were empty. Eddie's taking reassurance in Fifth Avenue because it's so much better than the rest of the city. Here's a prosperous street, only a quarter of the stores are empty. See, he's taking reassurance in something good here, but we notice about that something good that there's something a little bit fishy about it. It seems like it's on its way out, like he used to take reassurance in the oak tree maybe. And it brings the oak tree to mind and he's bothered about that. And so that's maybe a way in which it's related to his sense of unease, right? He's uneasy about how the world's going. He takes reassurance in something, the relatively prosperous Fifth Avenue, also the greengrocer and the bus that's expertly steered that someone mentioned on the comments. That was one of my professor's favorite lines in this book. And yet he has this recollection, like, I used to take comfort in something that seemed like it was sturdy and good and steadfast, and then it turned out to be hollow. And somehow his confidence is shaken by that. Ben, you should. Are we having other people on the chat who are also coming in on this aspect of the connection between the unease and the unease and the oak tree?
Yeah, I mean, this was something that they've been commenting on for a while, and I think we've hammered that home at this point. So I think we should move on to Jim and Dagny.
Okay, so let me start out talking about Jim and Dagny, and then we're going to cut over back and forth between me and Ben taking the lead on that. For the people here, since I'll be talking mostly for this part, I've put Ben into my ear rather than over the speaker, and this way he can be here in the video. I'll put him up in picture, in fact, and yet we don't get as much echo. All right, so what are the key differences between Jim and Dagny, switching now from the character of Eddie to them, in their approaches to business and to life? We had a question on what was the differences in their approach to problem solving. We had another question on what strong emotional reactions do they have, all the characters. Let's hold off on the strong emotional reaction ones for a minute and think about how do they each approach problem solving and what differences come up. A lot of people talked about in the Facebook chat Jim always trying to be afraid somehow, or trying to avoid responsibility, or trying to dodge things, and Dagny taking responsibility, being rational, productive, working. Do people have anything they want to add on this point? Yeah, who's saying that? I hear a voice from the... Oh, I just can't see. Okay, so you're saying that Dagny is prone to taking action, whereas Jim just wants to avoid responsibility. Yeah, I think Dagny has a really strong action empathy. We're told that she takes pleasure in taking action. We're told at one point that she's always known what to do. We'll come back to that later because there's a point at which she doesn't, and that's new for her, right? When she sees a problem, she wants to take action to solve it. As opposed to Jim, how is Jim different from this? Mohammed?
This approach between Jim as opposed to Dagny is summed up like in a line where
Can you speak a little louder?
he says, how can you know it's good? How can you be sure? How can you decide? And then she replies, well, somebody decides such things. She intends to be the someone to decide that, whereas Jim would much like to defer to some other preordained opinion or some authority on the matter, and he doesn't want to take responsibility for deciding himself as opposed to her, who wouldn't mind.
Okay, so Daphne wants to take responsibility for making a decision on something new.
Yes.
There's this new metal alloy out. Maybe it's a solution to our problems. Maybe it's not. She thinks it is, and she's willing to try it. Jim why do we have to try it? He's trying to push it off onto somebody else. He's always trying to push the responsibility to someone else. Al, did you want to know?
Yeah, the first words we hear out of Jim's mouth are, "Don't bother me." And he's saying that to a key assistant who is on top of a lot of the facts that are crucially important to the railroad.
Yeah, so Al is saying that here's what we know about him. The first we meet the guy, he's saying, "Don't bother me, don't bother me, don't bother me." And he's saying it to this guy, Eddie Willers, who's a key assistant. He's the kind of guy you'd expect to bring you facts. But it's actually even worse than that. Because Jim says, "Don't bother me, don't bother me, don't bother me," before he even knows who is at his door. He just doesn't want to be bothered by anyone. He doesn't want any kind of information to come into him. And when he is talking about the problems on the railroad, what's his focus?
People.
People, someone says. And particularly, what about people?
Their feelings.
Their feelings. So he doesn't want to hurt Orrin Boyle's feelings by canceling the order. I think so that's part of it. I think there's one other thing he's also very focused on.
People's disapproval of using something new. What will they think of us? What will...
Okay, good. Another aspect in which he's focused on people is maybe they'll disapprove of this new product. He talks about whose opinion did you get, Daphne, before deciding to go with this new metal. What else is Jim focused on? Evan?
Well, several times he says people can't blame us because the Rio Norte line isn't functioning. Just look at the state of the world. So it's his way of absolving himself of responsibility by just saying, I can't do anything about it. Look at the condition of the world.
Good. So he's very focused on the fact of whether he'll be blamed. People can't blame us for it. It's not our fault. And then he says the reason why people can't blame us is, look, Orrin Boyle just couldn't produce this metal because of some condition beyond anyone's control, and therefore he can't be blamed for not giving it to us, and we can't be blamed for not repairing our track. And Eddie's responding with things like, well, who cares who's to blame? Our railroad's going to go out of business. Our track's going to go. Who cares if they blame you or not? We want to know how to fix it. So Jim's focused on blame, on culpability, seemingly to the exclusion, or more so than on solutions to problems. Whereas Daphne seems she's got a solution, right? Eddie thinks we need a solution, doesn't quite know what it is maybe, and Daphne's got one. So another aspect of this, which of these characters strikes people as sympathetic and which unsympathetic? Which do you think the author's on the side of?
Eddie and Daphne.
What?
Eddie and Daphne?
Eddie and Daphne and not Jim, right. So the author clearly is siding with Daphne in some way. He's presenting her in a sympathetic light, and Jim comes across like a real loser. But one point I want us to think about going forward is a character's being sympathetic isn't the same as their being always right or flawless. And a character's being unsympathetic isn't the same as their never being right or good about anything. So we shouldn't assume from that. I think we can be pretty secure in our understanding that the author is rooting for Daphne, or in some sense is presenting Daphne to us as admirable. We shouldn't take that to mean whatever Daphne does is viewed by the author as good. And also, of course, we might disagree with the author, even if she does view something as good. So I want to ask, and the same likewise with Jim on the other side. Not everything is necessarily evil, but let's ask about Daphne. Does anyone have any? Does anyone think there's anything to criticize in Daphne's behavior here? We've got some criticisms of her from people in the book. We had a few criticisms from people on the Facebook chat. Come on, why should they run the light against the engine against that red light in that scene where we first meet her? They're going to get in trouble. Why is she beating up on them for that? Does anyone want to offer any criticisms of Daphne?
Well, I sense the coldness from her.
You sense some coldness from her, is that what you think?
Yeah, a little coldness from her personality.
Okay.
But she is very direct too, so that kind of crosses over.
She's very direct, but you're sensing a coldness from her in that she's maybe not concerned with people's feelings in the way that Jim is, and that seems to be a criticism Jim has about her. Any other things about Daphne that strike us as, less unreservedly positive?
One thing that, I read the book before, but now rereading it, struck my attention was how she took direct action when in that episode when the train stopped and the red light that was probably broken, she gave orders immediately where she was seeing that everybody was paralyzed, and she didn't think about trying to coach them or teach them or try to understand why they were paralyzed, but just commanded. So it was, I think, not criticizable as such, but one part
maybe
of
it
the
was
is that
a less
she was
ideal
looking
management
through the
style.
underlying problem of the paralysis, as opposed to she just wanted to get the results and get the train moving.
So she was just focusing on getting the train moving, he said, when he found the train was stopped, not in sort of helping to improve the railroad men who were moving it. Does everyone agree with that as a criticism, or does anyone think that's not fair? Evan?
No, I don't think that's fair. She asked many questions. She didn't just jump out of her train and say, get this train moving. She asked many questions, and she also questioned their motive, like why. She responded to every answer by asking a further question. And when she was told, well, we can't proceed, she was told the light is broken and we can't proceed until the light turns green. And she said, well, what are you going to do about it? Meaning, you just stated that you know the light is broken, and if you wait for it to change, it'll never change, so are you just going to sit here forever? So she was asking very good questions, and it was only after kind of going through an exhaustive list of questions to understand the situation that she just said, proceed, slowly, and then catch up. And when the engineer or the conductor asked her, well, who are you to say that? And she answered, they realized who she was. So I think, in fact, she gave a lot of information and ammunition that if any of them thought about it, they would be able to improve how they did their job. Because she didn't just rush out there and tell them what to do. She questioned how they were thinking, and only at a certain point, when she kind of exhausted all of the information available, she said, this is what you should do.
Yeah, so Evan is saying that, in effect, Daphne proceeded Socratically, as we might say, with these railroad men. She was saying, well, what do you see as the problem? If that's the problem, why are we going to do it? And I think that is true, at least in this extent. She doesn't immediately come out and ascertain what the problem is and then start barking orders. She first says, well, why are you doing it this way? What are you going to do about it? And yet, she is angry. It's pretty clear she's angry pretty early in that exchange. So I think there's at least something on both sides of this discussion in the back.
What I found interesting was that when the conductors asked her who she was, what her name was, and she gave her name, they said that she was surprised that someone would ask her name. So I was wondering what role this has to play in the story, that people wouldn't care to ask who she is, or she felt almost like a little insecure to even share who she was in that moment. That's the sense I got.
So I was interpreting it as this is her railroad that she runs, and these are her employees. So when she came out there, she just assumed they knew who she was, because normally when she's dealing with people on the railroad, but she hadn't told them she was on the train, and they happened not to recognize her at first. So, because she wasn't offended or hurt by it, she was just like, oh, I thought these guys knew who I were. At least that's how I interpreted it, but you might take it. She was saying she wondered if it was a sign of insecurity on Daphne's part, that she was struck that they didn't know who she was. I want to move. What about in Daphne's dealings with Jim? Jim says she's being high-handed. She places orders and then she sort of like dares him to cancel them, rather than going through what you might think of are the normal chains of command. Is this good business practice? Maybe it's good business practice if you have a boss like Jim, or what do people think about this? Any thoughts? I mean, it is unusual, right?
She is Taggart Transcontinental. That's when she walks by, they say that's Taggart.
That's who runs Taggart Transcontinental.
And that's how she does it, because Jim does not take actions.
So you're saying this is what it takes to run this railroad. The guy who's the president isn't doing it. How else is she going to do it? Plausible.
I think there's a difference between, and I think it's similar to her interaction with the people that were working the railroads, that she she cares about agency, and I think it would be one issue if she disagreed with the decision that somebody wanted to make. But I think what she's coming up against at some level is the sense of it is this inaction, it's this refusal to make a decision. And so it's kind of her assertion of agency in a sense. It's not so much subverting somebody else's mind or disrespecting what they're trying to say or do. It's coming up against the desire to make a decision, the belief that it's possible to solve the problem.
So we're getting Daphne's side of it. She's frustrated by people who seem unable or unwilling to act. And this is what's true of these railroad people that we met, and it seems like it's what's true of Jim, maybe. He's got a problem. What the hell? Why don't you, if you don't want to solve it my way, do you have any solution? He doesn't seem to care about solving it. And so she's just going to plow ahead. And I think probably we could all sympathize with that. And there's something admirable about her just plowing ahead. And I think overall this is portrayed as a very positive character. But does anyone think, Jim certainly thinks, maybe some of the other people think, I think some readers think, that there's a double edge to this sword? Maybe there's something high-handed, as Jim puts it, or is there anything to the criticism of her just plowing ahead in this way? Or is it just, people who are the kind of losers Jim are will react that way, but there's nothing to it? In the back?
Well, when we were reading it, I thought about how the way that she presents herself, like so controlling and like plowing, just moving forward with everything. He talked about, Logan told her that you felt nothing, you have no feelings at all. So I feel like because she is so headstrong, she puts on that facade of being so strong all the time, it shows that maybe, like to other people, she looks as if she's not empathetic or feeling.
Okay, so you're saying that this kind of headstrong attitude she has at least comes off to other people as though she has no feelings. You also mentioned that she's cold with the workers, and maybe her not seeing their side of it, if that's what's going on there, some people think it is her not being feeling. And I think this is a really natural transition to the next topic we want to talk about, which is the issue of what does Daphne and what did Jim have strong feelings about. So let me cut to Ben on that topic. Ben?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting topic to discuss, and it's really interesting to look at some of the reactions, some of the answers that people gave to the discussion question that we asked about this. We asked people to tell us what kinds of emotional reactions and to what kinds of things were, especially Jim and Daphne, but also Eddie, having reactions too. And one interesting thing was that a lot of people who answered this question didn't really even directly answer the question. And it was one of the questions that was used to answer, which makes me think it's a difficult question. And what a lot of people did in its place was to describe some sort of general character traits of the characters, but without getting deeper into their psychology. And so one lesson here, as you're reading this going forward, is try to pay a little bit more attention to the thoughts going through the head of I guess we're hearing an echo, Greg, but that's going to be something on your end because we don't have my speaker on here. But I'll keep talking. Try to pay attention going forward to what characters. There's a whole lot of the drama in the story actually coming out of that. And Greg, we're still getting an echo, and I don't know what to do about it because we don't have our speakers on here. Anyway. I'm stopping talking. Second. Now I'm going to start again. What's especially interesting, though, about people's answer to this question is that when readers did talk about what actual emotional reactions some of the characters were having, they tended to do better with Eddie. They tended to do better, I think, with Jim. People were very clear about the fact that Jim was emotional. And I mean, Jim kind of wears his emotions on his sleeve, especially his anger, because he gets angry at a number of them. He gets angry at Eddie. He gets angry at some of the things Eddie tells him about about the problems in Colorado. He gets angry at Dagny and angry about Reardon. So we have a better idea of Jim's emotions. And this is part of the criticism that some people are actually raising against Dagny. People are saying Dagny doesn't have any emotions at all, that she's cold and level-headed and unfeeling. And in fact, this is one of the things that Jim stresses the most in his criticism of Dagny. And so I just want to open it up now to discussion, especially online. Is this true? Is Dagny unfeeling? Is Dagny truly unfeeling? I mean, in a way, maybe she is, but are there ways?
I've got a lot of hands here about that.
What kinds of feelings?
I don't know if we're getting people in your side or
do we want
mine.
to talk about? So Ernest mentions Dagny has emotions while sitting on the train. What kind of emotions? Corey says the concerto. Sarah says the emotional reaction to the music. Okay, so we have a bunch of people noticing, and this was the main thing. I think that the few people who talked about this did notice that. So we have. She gives herself permission to feel, and she has these incredibly dramatic descriptions of the Halley Concerto. It was the rise. The music was rising, and it was the rising itself. That somehow this is where everything was headed in terms of Halley's own career. So there's emotion there, definitely in response to the music. Someone says she doesn't have emotions about people, but is that even true? Okay, so when Owen Kellogg quits, she feels like she is helpless and she's been beaten and she's feeling so certainly frustrated. What else does Dagny have emotions about apart from the music? Anna says the entering the Taggart terminal, there's something. Josh says Reardon medal. Now that's a particularly interesting case because this is the case where even though Jim has accused Dagny of being unfeeling, you get some of his internal monologue, and he notices that she has strong feelings, though perhaps he's not willing to admit it. What he can't understand is why does she have feelings about something like a medal? And that's actually an interesting question to think about. I mean, why would someone have feelings about a medal? And one way of thinking about that question is, well, is it just about the medal? Or is there something more to it than that? So Dagny is portrayed in this chapter as definitely having some pretty strong feelings, though it's very interesting that at least one of the characters, Jim, either doesn't notice it or doesn't want to acknowledge it. And it's especially interesting that a bunch of the readers didn't notice it either. And I don't know why that is. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. Why don't people think Dagny is emotional?
What things do you guys want to talk about under the heading of strong emotional reactions Dagny has? We've already listed the music. So the music, let me just say a word about that and then ask for you guys other ones. It's not just, she's enraptured by this music. This is like a profound, it speaks of the rising and it's the meaning of life and here's why the wheels have to keep turning. This is like a really I've not had that experience much, but this is not an everyday emotion. Right? This is some kind of profound joy. So we've got that. What other emotional experiences or things does Daphne feel? Let me cut. Sorry, Carrie Ann, you wanted to...
Yeah, that music passage is absolutely my favorite one in the chapter, but I wanted to speak to the Reardon medal in particular, because I think what it represents to Dagny, it seems, is it's going to keep Taggart Transcontinental from going bankrupt.
Good.
It's going to die unless they get Reardon medal on the tracks.
So
it means something very much of her. They're millions of dollars in the hole. and she's willing to spend the money on it because she thinks they'll make it back because it'll save.
Okay, so maybe the reason why Daphne feels so strongly about this medal is because this is a salvation of her railroad.
Yeah.
We'll get to see more of Daphne's feelings about the medal, so we'll be able to test that hypothesis when we get to hear her talk about it. Certainly one big part of it, right? Other things that Daphne's feeling strongly about? Go ahead, Ashley.
Well, it was more just, I think, wanting to speak a little bit to Ben's question of why we don't notice as much, like, when she does clearly have this enraptured response and she's, very much, she does seem, even Jim sort of notices that there's something about this medal, I think kind of ties into her emphasis on action. So one thing that I just kind of want to point out is don't just rely, a character like Jim might wear his emotions on his sleeves, but if emotions are kind of related to your values, look at what she's doing. Look at how she's acting to try to get access to what emotions she might be feeling. And I think that's just a really powerful thing.
Good. Someone made a similar point I noticed a few minutes ago also on the chat that, Jim talks a lot about his feelings, but here's Daphne taking action. Other things that stir strong feelings in her, Evan?
Well, a follow-up to that is more general than Kellogg. She is on the lookout for nuggets of gold of young people with great potential, which she searches for and tries to promote.
Okay.
So that's another example of what her values are as expressed through her actions.
Yeah, now you could imagine someone who in some cold, calculating way looks out for people who are talented but doesn't feel anything about it, or they do but only like, well, this will help my bottom line, and that's the only way they feel anything about it. But it doesn't seem like that's what's going on with her. She feels reassured when she sees Kellogg. He had the kind of face that she feels like she could deal with. What else does she feel by way of, we said she feels angry at the train workers when they're not doing their jobs the way she thinks they should. They're not doing them right. So she feels that. She feels weary and tired. What about when she goes into the tunnels at the beginning when the train, right? She says she feels a sense of exhilaration, I think, when that happened. So she does have feelings, and even very strong ones, like this reaction to the music. But how does she respond when Jim says that she has no feelings? You've never felt anything in your life, says Jim. It's a little weird of a thing for him to say, in a way, because Jim himself has just noticed something about her feelings, right? Jim's noticed that she has this anger she has a strong feeling about the medal. She doesn't know why she would feel that. But what does she say? I'm trying to bring up a certain slide here. Here we go. Let me just read that exchange. After they're kind of done with their decision, and Jim kind of decided he's not going to veto her and not going to overrule, and he will sign the thing for Reardon Medal despite her high-handed tactics, whatever, on her way to run a business and so forth. He wants to kind of give her some kind of zinger on the way out, it seems like. And he says, that's all right for you because you're lucky. Others can't do it. Do what? She responds. Other people are human. They're sensitive. They can't devote their whole lives to metals and engines. You're lucky. You've never had any feelings. You've never felt anything at all. So it's sounding like in the opposite of what Ashley was saying is how Ashley and I forget who it was online were saying, look, you don't listen to what Daphne acts, and you can see what she cares about and what her feelings are in her action. Jim's saying, no, the reason why you can go and find an action to solve this and you're such a problem solver is because you don't have feelings. I have feelings, and that's why, and most people do, and that's why I'm not able to take this quick, decisive action like you. You're lucky that you don't have any feelings. So how does Daphne respond? Does she say, like, screw you, I was just listening to this symphony a guy was whistling, and I got so wrapped up in it, and then we went into this train tunnel, and man, have you ever noticed what it's like going into the train tunnel? You feel the roots of the city and a sense of what it's like to be alive. You could feel the cold, hard, exhilarating pleasure of action. Is that what she says, or how does she respond? Mohammed. Yeah, so she agrees with Jim. She says sort of he's right. Here's the passage, because it's a weird passage, I think. Let me pull it up. Here we go. This should bring me to it. Why isn't it working? Daphne and Jim's feelings. Push me. Push. All right. Well, what she says, I don't know why I'm not getting it here. I ought to be able to bring it on the screen, but we're having technical problems. She feels a kind of weird. She first has astonishment, right? It says she feels astonishment, and then what? Does anyone have the passage handy? It's on page 23 to 24 of the hardcover or trade paperback. Jim says, "Other people are human. You've never felt anything in your life." And does anyone, Maria, are you around? Can you find it? Hold on, let me cut to you so we can see you while we do that, and put on this microphone. Okay.
She looked at him. Her dark gray eyes went slowly from astonishment to stillness, then to a strange expression that resembled a look of weariness, except that it seemed to reflect much more than the endurance of this one moment. "No, Jim," he said quietly. "I guess I've never felt anything at all."
So her first reaction is a kind of astonishment. And then she stopped still, like maybe she's having some thought, something new has dawned on her. But then it's a weariness. So if you're just astonished by something, you're not going to be weary about it, right? Because something astonishing is new, something you're weary about is old. So what the hell is going on here? Jim says you've never felt anything at all. Her first reaction is, what? And then it's like, oh. And then she says, yes, Jim, you're right, I've never felt anything. What explains this kind of odd constellation of reactions? Mohammed?
It might be that she's heard this ad nauseum. She's been told this type of thing before lots and lots of times, so she thinks of, oh, here goes the same old.
All right, so Muhammad's saying, look, she just hears this criticism all the time. That's why she's. But then why would she be astonished? I mean, if you get a criticism all the time, you'd just be weary. You wouldn't be. It's got to be something like this is something about this is new, such that she wouldn't expect it. But then when she thinks about it, she realizes it's like some version of something that she's been dealing with or battling for a long time that she's tired of. Now, this is where I say we should be looking for questions rather than answers. We're at the beginning of a mystery novel. We're at the beginning of getting to know these characters. We probably don't have enough material yet to find out what it is. But I think what we can get out of this scene is Daphne doesn't think of herself as unfeeling. In some sense, she thinks that from Jim's perspective, she does count as what Jim means by unfeeling. But there's also, it's a new thought to her that that's true, that the way she is, from Jim's point of view, counts as unfeeling. And this thought is connected to some issue that she must have been struggling with for a long time and is sick and tired of. And we don't know what that issue is, but Daphne's got something she's tired of that this somehow connects to, but connects to in a new and fresh way for her. One other passage I wanted to talk about Daphne's feelings, and then there's another set of issues we should move on to. There's one other huge feeling Daphne has in this chapter that we haven't really discussed. It's the first time she's ever felt it in her life, and that's really significant. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Robert?
Not being recognized?
Oh, so it is true that Robert says not being recognized. So it is true that it's a surprising experience that the track workers didn't recognize her. But I don't know, she's probably not such a prima donna that everywhere she goes, everyone recognizes her. There's something that we're specifically told. This is the first
feeling helpless.
Feeling helpless. So other people. Oh, I'm back on the wrong. Let me cut to. Here we go. Yeah, she feels helpless and what? Beaten. And when does she feel helpless and beaten, which is a new feeling for her? Never in her life has she felt it before. Owen Kellogg. So who is Owen Kellogg again? He's a terminal worker. He works in the terminal. She wants to promote him because she's noticed he's been good for all these years, but also she's realizing these Ohio people, things are not going well in Ohio. Look, these track workers, these people running the engine didn't even know what to do when the train broke down, or they knew what to do, but they were afraid to do it because they thought someone would switch the blame to them. Why? Well, the guy who's running this division is a friend of Jim Taggart's. Jim's this guy who's always worried about blame, not about solving problems. This is why probably these guys are like this. They have to deal with a boss who's like this. So she's got to change the guy who's running this division. There's this young guy, Owen Kellogg. He's not ready for this, but he's really good, and I got to get someone in, so I'm going to promote Owen Kellogg. And she gets back to the office, and lo and behold, Owen Kellogg's already asked for an appointment with her, and he tells her what? He's quitting. And he tries to bargain with her, and she says, is there anything I could offer you to stay? He won't tell her why he's leaving. He keeps saying it's a personal problem, or a personal decision. She keeps asking, well, is it this, is it that? No. What, another railroad? No. But you are going to keep working for a living? Yes. Where? I don't know. But you just won't work for my railroad? There must be some reason? No. And there's nothing I can give you, nothing I can say that told you? And he says, nothing on earth. And it's at that point that she feels for the first time in her life, what was it? What were the words again? Helpless and beaten. Notice all the previous times there were problems, she's the one who knows what to do. But this time, she's helpless and beaten. She doesn't know what to do. She's got nothing to do, and therefore she feels beaten. And so she asks a question. She asks why. And it says that the question is not addressed to Owen Kellogg in particular. She's not asking him in particular, why is there nothing here? But it's like this kind of bigger why, like, whoa, this is new. Why? What's going on here? And Owen Kellogg answers in an interesting way, but we'll come back to that in a little bit, because his answer is an instance of something we hear said a few times in this chapter. All right, I'm going to cut over to Ben now to talk about what's going on, come back to the issue of what is the state of the world and what might be causing it.
So we started the beginning of the broadcast tonight just talking about what the state of the world was. And we looked at that in particular through the eyes of Eddie, and especially considering kind of the cross-section of life that was presented at Taggart Transcontinental, and it's a pretty significant business. There are some characters in this chapter who've gone a little bit of the way in trying to understand why the world is the way it is, trying to understand what is responsible for the state of things. And they're saying there's an echo again, Greg, so you need to turn off your mic. Stop for a second. Okay, I'll try talking again. And so I'll direct this especially to the people in the chat. What do the characters think is the problem, the cause of the problems that they're witnessing? And what do you think? And now this is especially a question for first-time readers, because people who've read this book before know the answer. But what do first-time readers think is the reason the world seems to be falling apart? And what do the characters in the book say about this? So it's funny that we get dozens and dozens of comments on some questions, and then all of a sudden people go silent. Maybe this one is just a particularly difficult question, although it might be that I'm having trouble seeing the latest comments. Nope, I'm not. I refreshed.
Well, they do take a few moments
first
to come
timer,
up.
says Alec. Yeah. So there's, again, two questions. Why do, and I'm getting notes about echoes again. Corey thinks this is a tough question, especially if you've read this for the first time. Why do you think the world is falling apart? Well, I'll give you one point of data. I mean, Dagny, when she's in Ohio, when the train has broken down, she remembers the fact, oh, the superintendent of the Ohio division is not very good, and she'd really like to find somebody better to replace him. She's, of course, thinking about replacing him with Owen Kellogg, and we see what happens at the end with that. But before that happens, while she's still in Ohio, she's thinking about there are no good men that she can find anywhere to hire. And Owen is one of the few she still thinks is left. Schuyler has a possible answer to this question. The characters think the world is falling apart because of the failing businesses like Taggart Transcontinental. Well, that's an interesting observation, Schuyler, though, of course, that simply raises the question of why are the businesses failing? Now, Dagny is taking, is answering that one level deeper by saying, well, there aren't enough good people to run the businesses. But then of course, there's the question, well, why is that? And she doesn't seem to have an answer to that question. And the fact that she doesn't have an answer to that question is probably part of the reason why she reacts the way she does at the end of the chapter in the way that Greg just discussed. I mean, she for the first time ever feels helpless because here's her chance to try to right her business by hiring Owen. And even though he was one of the few good people she thought she could find here, he doesn't want to take the job. And that's pretty mysterious. Why wouldn't he want to? And he doesn't, of course, really answer the question. And not getting an answer from him is part of why she probably feels pretty helpless. I think that's then a good opportunity to transition to talking about who is John Galt, talking about this line, who is John Galt, which appears by my count about 4 times in the chapter. The first time, of course, happens at the very beginning with the bum. And we don't know why the bum says it or what the context is because it's the first line of the novel, and so we don't know what happens before it. But presumably there's some discussion happening between Eddie and the bum. So then there's 2 more cases. Who wants to point out in the chat where the other 3 cases happen? We know, I think we talked about one of them already, but where else does this come up? Where else do we hear one character or another saying, who is John Galt? And Pop Warner is not Pop Warner. Pop Harper is the first one. Yeah. Then Christopher says Pop. That's the second one after the bum. Where's the third time that it comes up? Brian got Pop. No, Kellogg is the 4th and last. There's a third. So the first one's the bum. The second one is Pop Harper. The third one, and then, yeah, Evelise got it. That the train crew, and Evan got it. The train crew. She's out there talking to the engineer and the conductor and the fireman of the train, and she's asking, when can you expect somebody to come and fix the signal? And one of them says, who is John Galt? And so one of the questions that we asked earlier this week was, what does this question, who is John Galt, express? What does it mean in the mouths of these various characters? And we got a number of people saying, it expresses this kind of resignation that seems to pervade the world of Atlas Shrugged in this period. We talked about the material state of the world at the beginning, but we're touching here now on something like the spiritual or the psychological state of the world of Atlas Shrugged. Characters in this chapter, they feel resigned, and you can even get a kind of direct transcription of what they're thinking, because sometimes people ask, what do you mean by this? When Pop Harper says, who is John Galt, it's because there's all this stuff that's breaking down. The subway's broken down. The Queensboro Bridge is under repair, and not because... and this typewriter doesn't work. So what's the use, is in effect what he's saying there. And then later with the train workers, they tell Dagny what they mean by don't answer questions that nobody can answer. And, we started by asking, why is the world the way it is? And part of what's going on here is this is a question that they don't have an answer to. The question that nobody seems to be able to answer is, why is the why is the world the way it is? And I think this gets then finally to the point that Greg was making just a few minutes ago about Daphne and how she turns to the audience, in effect, or she turns to the sky and says, why? She's not just asking Owen Kellogg why he doesn't want to take the job. She's asking a little something more than that. And it's probably a version of this question. Why can't I find good people? Why is the world the way it is? And then we get Owen Kellogg's answer to the question, which of course then is the fourth and final use of who is John Galt in the chapter. But
I just wanted to say something about the way in the earlier views before we go to Owen's. Eddie's the first use of it we hear from the bum, right? It's the very first line of the novel, Who is John Galt? And he's talking with this bum. And what's going on with Eddie? Eddie has this weird emotion he's feeling. He describes it as dread. Well, it's not exactly dread. It's a kind of apprehensiveness. He feels it in general at twilight. It seems to come over him in episodes. Has he always felt it? No, he hasn't always felt it. But he has to ask himself, has he always felt it? So he's felt it for a long time, and he can't really remember when it began, although it wasn't in his childhood, right? So he has to think back that way to get a sense of where it was coming from. And it's evoked by twilight, which is the kind of, when the light's going out, right? Twilight always gives him this feeling. Looking at the things in the city that seem dilapidated give him this feeling. And yet he says, no, there's nothing wrong with the city. It's always looked this way. So he's kind of like used to the city looking this way, but it's still bothering him. And the bum asks the question, who is John Galt? In the course of some conversation with Eddie, we don't know exactly what, but the bum asked for a dime and they went on talking. And he says, who is John Galt? And Eddie says something about the way he said it seems to imply that the bum knows what he's feeling. He knows why he's feeling it, and that this is how you should be feeling, that this is normal. Eddie's, the way he's feeling in this moment, is somehow like the bum's way of life. And what do we notice about the bum? He's got a look of cynical resignation, and one other unusual thing that you might think. Yeah, his eyes are intelligent. So this isn't just some guy who didn't have any shot in life and there was nothing. Something's happened to this guy that's brought him to being a bum, despite being bright and insightful. And he sees somehow a kindred spirit in Eddie Willers in this moment, or something about Eddie's feeling or view of the world in this moment, which is a view Eddie doesn't like, but he feels coming over him a lot. The bum is sort of endorsing with this question, who is John Galt? Then the next people we see asking it are these train workers who are resigned to a situation that they know is bad and they're not going to try to fix it, right? And Daphne is the one who knows how to fix it. Daphne's also the one who, the next one is Pop Harper, but it's a similar situation of the world's going to hell and there will be no more typewriters and who is John Galt? That's just how things are. Somehow it's expressing this resignation and a kind of the normalcy of it. The next case is the train workers, right? But Daphne knows what to do. The people who say, who is John Galt, there's something helpless about them. There's something resigned about them. There's something defeated about them. And Daphne isn't, right? She knows what to do to start the train. And Eddie feels like whenever he's back with Daphne, it's like the motor starts in the car. Things get going. There's action again. We know what to do. There's a plan. Eddie has this diffuse anxiety. Part of the cause of it must be that he's just talked to Orrin Boyle, and now he's going to talk to Jim Taggart, and he knows that there's a problem on the line, and no one's trying to do anything about it, and he knows something has to be done, but he doesn't know quite what. Daphne's the one who comes and knows what. But now Daphne, for the first time, feels helpless and defeated. Feels the way we're given an indication that these other people who say, who is John Galt, feel. And she says, why? What is this? This is new. This isn't my world. And listen to how Owen Kellogg responds. He stopped, shrugged, and smiled. He was alive for a moment, and it was the strangest smile she had ever seen. It held secret amusement, and heartbreak, and an infinite bitterness. He answered, "Who is John Galt?" This is really interesting. He's amused. I guess the fireman's a little bit amused on the train, but in general, people aren't amused when they use this. He's got some, and it's secret amusement, right? So he's got some perspective on this that's different. This has some special meaning to him. It's not just a catchphrase, I guess. And heartbreak, amusement and heartbreak is a weird combination. And infinite bitterness. Who is John Galt? That's the question. What's going on with Owen Kellogg? What does this phrase mean to him? It seems like part of it is saying, like, welcome to the world of people who say, who is John Galt, Daphne Taggart? You're experiencing what they experience, and you maybe haven't before. But there's something kind of odd going on with Owen. Are there any questions any of you guys want to raise? Okay, so I haven't asked your name yet, actually. Michelle, who's been making a lot of good points today, she says she's just curious about the roles of each of these characters and how they're going to evolve. And yeah, one thing you want in a first chapter is to pique your interest in what these people are going to do. We can't answer that one because we've got a few months to find out for ourselves, all of us. Any other observations or questions about the first chapter, ways in which it was similar or different to what you guys were expecting if you're new, or things that you noticed afresh if you've read it before? Yeah.
I don't know if I would know what to think about Jim and Daphne, because they're sort of stuff, but, whether it's business, on the one hand, you got to support the little guy, you got to...
A very gentle man who values things, and we're told the things he values, and it really gives us a preview of what's in the rest of this chapter. He sees a clean white curtain and some vegetables, and he has this feeling about what's going on in the world, and he wishes he could protect them in some way. And it's a very poetic way of coming at it. And then also all of the things that he values.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat and kind of summarize this because I'm not sure how well you're being picked up on the microphone. They're impressed that a novel that has such a large scope, and we'll see how large a scope it has, but we at least know now it deals with problems the Transcontinental Railroad, starts with the reflections of a pretty sensitive-seeming guy in Eddie. And I think you're remarking some of the tenderness of he's disheartened by this uneasiness in the city, and he takes comfort in a guy who's got a vegetable push cart who seems to be doing a good job. His onions have a really nice green about them, and the curtains in someone's house are really nicely laundered and white, and a bus turns a corner expertly steered. And this is the guy who really is rooting for these people who are doing well, who are trying their best to make a good life for themselves. And he's reassured that that's happening. There are people like this, even in this twilight where the bum says, who is John Galt, and gets him all unnerved. And then his immediate reaction to that is he wants to protect those things. He feels like they're somehow threatened by being exposed to the sky. And then this gets him thinking about the oak tree, which we talked about. Ben, are there things, observations or questions we're finding in the chat feed that we can go to?
Jennifer was just asking about what the phrase was that the calendar reminded Eddie of, and this is somewhat connected to what you were just discussing. But Christopher actually answered her question right away. The "your days are numbered" phrase, which is what comes up. That's what Pop Harper says to his typewriter. But Eddie doesn't remember that it was a phrase he was trying to remember in connection with the oak tree.
One thing that's interesting about this book is it proposes a lot of little mysteries. Like, there's a phrase, and he couldn't remember what it was. And then a few pages later, we learn what the phrase is, and you can kind of wonder what might it have been, and then you learn it. Or Eddie thought of the one precious companion of his childhood who told him what they were going to do. Well, who is that? Well, we don't know yet, but then later we learn that he's friends with the I mean, by the end of the chapter, it's clear that it was Daphne, right? Everyone's got that. When they were kids, she said, we're going to run the railroad, help me. or I'm going to run the railroad, help me. But we're not told that initially when we're telling that. So we've got this placeholder. There's some special person from his childhood that means a lot to him, and then we can fill it in. And there are 2 or 3 of those that happen just within the scope of this chapter. And one thing that I think that's doing is it's setting you up for the expectation that when a question is raised, there's something about this that he didn't understand or whatever, that when something's underlined as not understand or something to be understood, it'll come later, something that'll spell out. There's something specific, some specific question he has in mind, some specific reason that Daphne was astonished and then felt weary about the things she was astonished by. Some specific reason why this guy has this confusing way of saying who is John Galt in response to this question, or why he won't accept the better job offer from her and has no reason for it. Some of the answers we get right, a few pages later in the chapter, but I think that's meant to signal us that the ones we don't, we should expect are coming. And some of them might take 2 chapters or 5 chapters or 30. But it's not a book that casually throws out questions, and it's a book that repays keeping track of the questions. And by giving you answers to some of them early, it I think, underscores that.
So Christopher, I think, is raising a good question on here that we might want to talk about, because actually, since it touches on something that I skipped earlier on, he says, he has a question about Eddie's immense uneasiness. Did we say he might have gotten it from witnessing the trail he got from looking into the hollow tree? Now, we've talked a little bit already about the similarities that seem to exist between the tree and Taggart Transcontinental. And I think Christopher is pushing that similarity a little further than we had seen before, than we had discussed before. I mean, what it was that made Eddie feel so bad about the tree was exactly that he felt a kind of betrayal about it, thinking that it was solid on the inside, vital, living on the inside, when in fact it wasn't. And so I think what Christopher's asking is, well, what kind of betrayal might he be witnessing in the world around him? It's on page 6 of the hardcover edition, page 14 of the mass market. And this is the scene that comes up right after he describes his time with his childhood companion and recounts having heard at church about how the minister thinks that we must always reach for the best within us. What do you suppose is the best within us? And Dagny says, well, his childhood companion says, I don't know. But Eddie goes on in the next paragraph to say that he's always thought that we should do whatever is right. He's kept that statement unchallenged ever since. The other questions had faded in his mind. He'd been too busy to ask them, but he still thought it self-evident that one had to do what was right. He had never learned how people could want to do otherwise. He had learned only that they did. It seemed simple and incomprehensible to him, simple that things should be right, and incomprehensible that they weren't. And then in the very next paragraph, he goes and looks at he's standing in front of the Taggart building, and it's the tallest and proudest structure, and it would always stand there, which should sound maybe a little bit familiar. And so, yeah, Christopher raises a good question. Is there something in the world that is giving him a similar sense of betrayal as what he felt in response to the oak tree? And does it have something to do with the fact that he's finds it incomprehensible that people should do the right thing and don't? And what is the right thing? What is the best within us? These are some things I think we're going to want to think more about.
One thing to notice about that is the oak tree represents permanence and stability and strength to him, right? That's how it's described. If a giant tried to pull it, he wouldn't be able to uproot it. It's like so stable and steady. And likewise, that's what Taggart Transcontinental represents to him, right? It's ocean to ocean forever, he thinks. It's always going to be there. So Eddie has some kind of sense that makes him maybe comfortable or something about what the world is like, that certain things are stable and permanent and enduring. And something about the oak tree incident symbolizes to him that maybe the things you count on that you think are stable and permanent and enduring, they might turn out not to be. And something about the state of the world, maybe the fact that a prosperous street is one with only a quarter of the businesses shut on it, is making him, I think, question the morals. He does have these questions about why people are the way they are morally, and maybe those are related to it. But there's also a question about does the things that he counts on and thinks we could count on, maybe you really can't. Maybe the world isn't a place where you can count on things. But Ben, one question that came up a lot on the chat on the Facebook discussion group that you had some interesting things to say about last night when we were talking about it was what's Eddie's thought process here? Some people were describing him as, he gives up thinking about these things too soon, and that's why he feels uneasy. He's like somehow dishonest or something wrong with him. And other people were saying, no way, man, Eddie, he's like so dogged and thoughtful and earnest. So it might be worth just noting that question. And do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, we actually get a little bit, perhaps, of some data that could help answer that in the passage that I just read, because it mentions the fact that Eddie has just been too busy to try to answer some of these questions. And that's pretty similar, actually, to something else that we get from Dagny when she's on the train, that she's been too busy to feel. So that speaks a little bit to the question of whether is it some kind of dishonesty on his part. I'll leave that as an exercise to the reader, exercise for the reader to think about the significance of. But maybe another way of packaging it is we've talked now about the thought processes that Jim Taggart is using to deal with the problems that his company is facing. And if there's, is there any question of whether Eddie is using those kinds of thought processes? Is he being dishonest in the way that James is being? Hard to see that he is.
This is a question, Robert, you raised to Ben and me that we had in mind to take up at the end but not say too much about and encourage people to talk about on Facebook, which is the title of this chapter is The Theme. And what does that mean? I said we couldn't say too much about what that meant if we can suppose it has to do with the theme of the novel yet, because we're all the way here at the beginning of the chapter and we're going to need to learn a lot more about the novel before we can say what its theme is and really be basing it on what we got in the novel. But what can we say? What does the phrase "the theme" indicate so far? Ariane? Good.
Any longer. So there's something that we can glean about the way maybe we respond to this chapter, the way she responds to the music. I think is the only hint we get in this chapter about the theme.
So good. There's the theme of the piece of music, the Halley's Fifth Concerto. And notice that here too, nobody anymore writes this kind of music. Nobody anymore makes good typewriters. There's some kind of, but this is the kind of thing that nobody does anymore. It's not a theme of giving up, or it's what's been given up on, maybe. And then I want to invite you guys to just think on your own, and now I'm talking to the people out in Facebook land, and to discuss on Facebook what themes do we find in this chapter that we could be on the lookout for in the rest of the book. And the other thing is, what mysteries do we find in this chapter that we could be on the lookout for the rest of the book? Because I think in the first few chapters, and really I think in the first third of the novel, a lot of what we're finding is collecting of mysterious things that we start to see as more and more related to each other, and we start to look for the solutions to them in the second and third part. So I think that's a pretty good note to end on. I apologize for the various technical difficulties we've had over the course of the evening, but they're kind of baked into trying to do something new like this. All right, well, we're going to post another set of questions in a few days. We're going to, hopefully people will carry on discussing Chapter 1 for a few more days, picking up on some of the issues we raised here in the Facebook group. We're going to post some new questions probably Monday or Tuesday. We haven't decided exactly when. And then a week from Tuesday on the 12th, we're going to convene to talk about Chapter 2, which is called The Chain. And with that, I think we can sign off. So thanks everyone who was here. And from New York, and I'm not hearing Ben's audio, so I'll just assume that he would join me in saying it also from New Orleans. Good night, everyone, and good premises.
Thank you for listening to the Atlas Project broadcast. This broadcast was produced by Gregory Salmieri and Ben Baer, under the auspices of the Ayn Rand Institute. Music is used courtesy of a Creative Commons license by composer Chris Zabriskie on SoundCloud. For more information about Ayn Rand, please visit aynrand.org.